Alrighty.
Welcome everybody to this breakout session at the Office of Indian Education Project Directors meeting. Our session is titled A Research-Based Needs Assessment Tool for American Indian Students. We're so glad that you decided to join us today for this session. We know that many of our grantees are interested, motivated, or obligated maybe to identify needs of their Native American youth so that those needs can be adequately addressed through school-based services or maybe through collaboration in conjunction with some schools. So we know that many of you are also interested in learning about what types of tools tools or instruments are available out there, which are specific to our context of serving youth and Native communities. So we're really excited to be able to lift up this work and this tool here for you today. I'll say a few words about logistics. I think everybody by now of day 3, you're kind of used to the using that chat box in Pathable. We really want to hear your input and get your questions in there. So we hope that you'll kick it off by saying hello and let us know where you're joining us from over there in the chat box. Our team today has a couple of activities as well as some polls. So keep an eye out there for those instructions to show up in the chat box, and we'll let you know when we want you to chime in on those polls as well. We'll lift those up in that polls tab when the time comes. And then you also notice in that files tab there that there's a number of different links and documents that you can check out, and our team will talk about those a little bit later on. So thank you. I can see folks starting to chime in the chat box saying hello from Florida. Keep that coming, and we'll go ahead and get started with our standard disclaimer. And just one more click and that should play.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right, thank you. Now we got that out of the way. I'm going to say hello. I see other people chiming in the chat box from Virginia, Alaska, from Oklahoma, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Very happy to have you all here today. I'm also really excited to welcome our team of presenters today. First, I'd like to welcome Carrie Engler, President of Seneca Consulting and primary author of the needs assessment tool that we're going to be sharing with you today. So she brings 25 years of experience in the education research. Seneca Consulting is a small women-owned business that provides psychometric program evaluation and as well as qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis services. Her current work includes supporting the University of Hawaii in building statewide assessments for Hawaiian language immersion schools under the federal and state accountability systems. I think there might be some folks interested in that work if we had another session. But in this role, she leads the psychometric team in constructing assessments that prioritize the values and worldview of the Hawaiian language community while ensuring that those results provide relevant and high quality information to stakeholders. So interesting. We're also joined by Stephen Tedeschi. He is a researcher at Marzano Research, and in this role, he engages in numerous technical assistance and research projects, including data collection, management, analysis for studies focused on career and college readiness, school improvement, and support systems. He also supports the state initiatives and his organization focused on improving educational opportunities and outcomes for American Indian students. Currently, he is leading a status assessment evaluation focused on the implementation of Oregon's Tribal History or Shared History Initiative. He is a Teach for America alum. Tedeschi has 8 years of experience in education as a practitioner in tribal, traditional public, as well as charter schools. And also, I'd like to welcome Trudy Cherisaro. She is Director of Research at Marzano Research with 20 years experience conducting research and program evaluations across a variety of topics, including teacher preparation, educator evaluation, reading and vocabulary programs, early childhood education, and education leadership. So as a researcher, Deputy Director and Director for the REL, or Regional Educational Lab Central at Marzano. Chair Asaro has led a number of REL research and technical assistance projects and is an author on seven REL Central reports that were published by the Institutes of Educational Sciences, including the report titled Profiles of Partnerships Between Tribal Education Departments and Local Education Agencies, which, side note, I can tell you is available in the resources tab from day one of our conferences. We had a session on data sharing. So Trudy and Stephen join us from Marzano Research, and like Carrie, they were a part of the project team that led this needs assessment work under a previous REL contract. And I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for those lovely introductions. So appreciate it, and so appreciate all of you calling in and joining us today for this discussion around the Native American Needs Assessment tool and the process that was used in North Dakota. And I love that Tracy's encouraging everyone to use the chat and just say where they're from, maybe add your organization or anything along those lines. We're just happy to see the diversity of where people are coming from. It's really, really exciting. Thank you. And so just to talk a little bit about our objectives for our conversation today, before we dive in, I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge the Director of Indian and Multicultural Education in North Dakota, Lucy Fredericks. The project we're going to talk about today is really the result of Lucy's vision for having more voices at the table when it comes to understanding and supporting schools that serve Native students. We'd also like to thank the community stakeholders in North Dakota who really guided and participated in this project. It took place over a 5-year period, and really the work is a testament to all of their wisdom and effort and contributions. And I could talk a lot about this project, but we would be here for hours. So today, really our objectives for our conversation are to focus on the tool and how it was developed and structured and some uses of the data, and then some of the lessons that we've learned through this process. And we'd like to start out just with this opening activity and do a quick land acknowledgement. And many of you may be aware of nativeland.org, the website. So in the chat, we're just hoping you can either type in the name or names of the tribal lands you're on, or use the link that'll be in the chat, or just text your zip code to the number on the screen and add your results into the chat. I feel like this is just a nice way for us to kind of get to know each other over the chat, and also to maybe reconnect with the Native Land website. And I just love this website, and I find myself, going down a rabbit hole every time I'm on it, just looking at the different tribal websites and some of the different instructional resources that are available. So just wanted to point that out. And I'll start us out. My name is Carrie Englert, and I live in the foothills of Colorado, and I'm located on the ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Ute people. And Tracy, I just wanted to pause and see if you could give us some ideas of what people are putting into the chat.
Yes, we have a few responses here. Folks joining from Rocky Boy Indian Reservation in Montana, home of the Chippewa Cree. We have folks from Wichita, I'm going to say the English pronunciation, sorry, Wichita, Comanche, Apache, Kiowa, and Kickapoo. From Northwest Alaska, from the Bering Strait region. We have folks joining from the lands of the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and Potawatomi. someone joining from the Nisqually Nation in Washington State, Houma, Louisiana, Coeur d'Alene Reservation in northern Idaho, and somebody joining from Virginia, the Monacan ancestral lands.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Welcome. And I am going to turn the conversation over to Trudy to talk about some of the introduction materials to the toolkit.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks, everyone, for joining in the chat. It's interesting to see where everyone is coming from. So we're just going to take a few minutes to kind of share some high-level information about the origins of the project and kind of the funding of the tool and the project as well. So we developed this needs assessment tool and conducted projects for this work under the previous Regional Educational Laboratory contract. Marzano Research served as the prime for the central region of this contract, which included North Dakota and South Dakota, who were involved as partners in the American Indian Research Alliance. So under the Regional Educational Laboratories, all the work was conducted through research partnerships. And in particular, this project was developed with partners in the American Indian Education Research Alliance. And our partners in this alliance included representatives from both North Dakota and South Dakota, and focusing really around two primary questions of how can needs assessment data be used to identify American Indian student needs and inform the supports needed for schools to meet American Indian student needs. And then also, how can we evaluate culturally responsive instructional programs implemented in both North Dakota and South Dakota? Go to the next slide, Carrie. Thank you. So we worked with our partners to develop Native American needs assessment tools that they could use in their states. And then we also created tools that we could share with others who might be interested in understanding the needs of Native American students in their own context. So you see three tools that are available here, resources that are available here. The tools that were developed under the REL contract remain publicly available, and that includes an infographic that provides an overview of how to integrate the needs assessment items into local initiatives, kind of a high-level roadmap of how to do that in your context if you're interested. And then the report tool, that's labeled tool, actually gets into more detail. So this one shares more details about the teacher and administrator survey that we developed in North Dakota, and provides guidance on how to use the tool, including guidance on analyzing data, communicating results, and developing action plans. And then on the right there, you'll see an action plan. So this was an action plan that was developed by the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction that's also available publicly on their website. This was developed with our support to share more information about resources that were available aligned to the data and the needs identified in the data from the needs assessment to really assist educators and administrators in meeting the needs of Native American students. We'll go into a lot more detail about that action plan a little bit later, but we just wanted to make you aware of these resources that are publicly available, and those should be included in your Pathable site for you to access and look at as well. So really, our partners in North Dakota and South Dakota identified needs assessment work as a priority because they didn't believe they had the right mechanisms in place in their current system to really gather those multiple perspectives and multiple voices about the unique needs of Native American students in their states. They wanted to hear from administrators, teachers, and in North Dakota, even students, to build their understanding of the issues and strengths, and to use that information to really provide resources to support administrators and educators in supporting American Indian students. So we'd like to take a few minutes to hear from you to kind of help us understand why you're interested in this session and what you might be interested in terms of American Indian student needs. We'd like to ask you to go ahead and access the poll and Pathable and answer the question: in what areas would you like to understand the success and needs of American Indian students?
So folks should be able to find that poll. It's in the tab next to the chat tab. And I think it's right, it should be here right at the top, but you can use that slider bar to find that poll that asks in what areas you'd like to understand the successes and needs of American Indian students. We've got a couple of responses there and a few upvotes I see too. So one comment is about creating a needs assessment that is practical and useful for Indigenous communities. We have another comment that reads, where to find existing data, more specifically data related to East Coast. Another comment here, another response, graduation rates, post-secondary retention rates. Another comment just got in here. What I would like how others have completed needs assessments in their communities. I'd like to understand or know how others have completed needs assessments. I like that people are giving those votes too. It looks like we have a few people giving a thumbs up about that comment about creating a needs assessment that is practical and useful. Are there other particular areas maybe that you're interested in learning about? While you're responding to the poll, I'm going to check the chat. I don't see any extra comments there. Well, that poll will remain open and you can continue to add your thoughts there, and feel free to also use that chat box liberally as well.
Great, thanks, Tracy. So sounds like a lot of some of the stuff that we'll be covering and talking about. So hopefully this will be an informative session to help you understand about developing needs assessments. And then some of the areas sounded aligned to also the areas that would be covered in the needs assessment that we developed. So I'm going to hand it over to Carrie, and she's going to dive more deeply into sharing about how the tool was developed.
Thank you so much, Trudy, and thanks everyone for your comments and feedback in the poll and in the comments. I'm really going to try to use those to kind of highlight some of the areas of the presentation as we go through it. And certainly Tracy is monitoring the chat, so as questions come up and you want to just pop those in the chat, please feel free to do that. So I'm going to just keep on. So I'm going to start with North Dakota, and really that needs assessment process follows a typical pattern. And this may look really similar to other needs assessments that you've seen or that you've worked with. And starting in the top box, we really focused a lot of time on determining what the needs assessment surveys were going to cover and kind of considering how that would unfold. Again, I think somebody mentioned needs assessments that are practical and useful, and really that kind of started with that survey content. Moving on to the next box, North Dakota was administering these surveys every year, and they've continued to administer those. We've helped them analyze their data, and then really using that data, so that analyzing data is not really the endpoint for us, but we've used that data to really create that action plan that Trudy showed on one of the earlier slides. And then helping disseminate that information and implementing that action plan to really support schools in North Dakota in a targeted way. If they were BIE schools or if they were public schools, the plan is really open and available to everyone. And we followed the cyclical process, and I really love the circular nature of this because it really allows us to reflect every year on each of these elements and really try to improve the work that we're doing and communicate with schools about what they really want to see. And so we can make those really purposeful adjustments. Okay. And so just thinking about that top box a little bit, I just would like to unpack that a little bit more. And it really is about what we're going to measure. So what's going to be on the survey? And our first steps were really working in partnership with North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, and they had been administering a survey every year to administrators. And they really wanted to build that out a little bit more and include more voices. So we had to consider a few things. What the content would look like and what the items on the survey should be. And we really started with just a quick lit review, but more than just a lit review, just talking to North Dakota educators about what they would want to see on a survey and kind of using that as our North Star, what the community wanted to see. And then we thought a lot about who would be taking the surveys and including a range of voices and perspectives. So just in this first round, back when we first started, it was administrators, we added teachers, and now we're just starting to work with students as well, which is really so exciting. And then finally, we thought about how the survey should be structured in terms of different kinds of items. So we ended up including some really quick closed-ended items, but then really expanding that to open-ended items so that educators who were responding could really dive a little bit more deeply as they saw fit, as they wanted to give the state more information. And as we were starting the process, the team spent a lot of time thinking about, again, about the content, and it led to this kind of working concept of validity. And we really like this definition that was proposed by Ernie House. And he says, I take validity to mean something like the worthiness of being recognized. And when we thought about that in the context of the needs assessment surveys, it became critical that the determinations about worthiness really came from the community. It came from the schools, it came from the teachers, educators who were working in the community to make those decisions. And so really, the community became the center point, and the research team just were sort of on the periphery facilitating those conversations. So that really became the core for us. And one of the other ideas that we kind of pulled in, and we hadn't seen it a lot in survey development, but this idea of cultural validity. And that the validity, the idea is really about making sure that the instrument, if it's a survey or if it's an assessment, that the data really resonates with the community and it's going to be useful. Because it's sort of heartbreaking for me to see a survey that people collect data, collect the data, people take time to answer the questions, and then maybe it's not that useful. So really it was working with the community to identify those kind of key areas. And that was, we got to that point through iterative rounds of focus groups. We conducted interviews. We did presentations for the Department of Public Instruction. And just every time we went around that iterative circle, it was just another opportunity to really make those connections. And I just wanted to check in really quickly with Tracy, and apologies, Tracy, because I'm having a hard time doing the slides and talking and monitoring the chat. So is there anything in the chat that people have questions about?
No worries at all. I'm here to help and help lift up those questions. And so far, I don't see any questions. We did have a couple additional responses to the poll. Folks talking about state testing or data showing that scores of Native students versus their classmates. But if you do have questions for us, feel free to type them in the chat there. There's also a poll that's specific to questions for the presenter. So either one of those places is you can submit your questions for us.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you so much. And just one of the comments I think was around state assessment data. And I think one of the nice things about some of the needs assessment surveys is that we've done the work over time, and it's sort of allowed for capturing not only needs of schools, but also highlighting successes and bright spots in North Dakota. And I think helpful too to contextualize some of the statewide assessment student data that may come out too. So it's sort of another data point, another way to really understand what's happening in the state, what's happening with Native students that can kind of shine some success stories or highlight those success stories. So I will say just about this slide, I felt like the unique part of this work really evolved around reflecting the community's priorities, their wisdom about what they wanted to see in their students' education, what was important, and that as a research person and as a team, we really became accountable to the community and really wanting to make sure that what they were telling us was really reflected in the survey. So that was really, again, that was our North Star, and providing those opportunities for that dialogue was really key for us, and really understanding what the community wanted to communicate with the state. And these are some of the things that people told us that throughout the survey development, and I think the most powerful statements really came from the stakeholders, and they were really clear about what they wanted from the survey. They wanted a survey to cover broad areas. So attendance and school climate and some of these bigger areas. And so they could understand those strengths and then where support could be offered. They really wanted open-ended questions, so there could be more detailed, more contextual understanding of the educators' perspectives. And they wanted to include items around Native language use and teaching Native language, restorative justice, trauma-informed practices. So really kind of broad and deep areas as well. And they wanted the survey to have a more positive focus. So I think to move away from a deficit focus, which can often happen with needs assessment, to really shine that light on some success stories as well. And these were the areas that they came up with ultimately for the needs assessment survey. And we started collecting some of this data early in 2017 and 2018. And it really has had me thinking about data collection during COVID, and having collected this data over time, we can start to see maybe some of the impacts or how COVID has impacted some of these areas. And we're just starting to really unpack some of that information right now and working with the Department of Public Instruction on that. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight some lessons learned just in these early stages of the work. Again, I think as a research team, we thought a lot about our accountability to the community and centralizing that relationship. And I think the partnership was built on that need for transparency so that stakeholders felt ownership of the data, and hopefully felt like the survey and the results were really useful because that they were part of that early development. And this is a quote that one of our school administrators shared with us. And she said, the survey has multiple purposes. The questions can prompt people's thinking about their practices and issues facing Native American students, and send messages about what they should be doing to help students. And so the survey became a way to, understand what was happening in schools, but it was also a way for the Department of Public Instruction to communicate outwards as well about some of the priorities and some of the things that educators might be thinking about in their own schools. All right, and I think it's back to you, Trudy.
Yeah, so we wanted just to also give you a chance to share some more information with us. So Carrie talked a lot about engaging the community members in this process to develop the needs assessment and in helping to understand the needs of American Indian students. So we're wondering if you could put into the chat, how have you engaged community members to understand the needs of American Indian students in the work that you're currently doing? I see someone put asking Native American and American Indian students directly, which is wonderful. And understanding definitely from the student level is a great way to gather information. Regional leadership teams. Another person saying student surveys, parent surveys as well. So in addition of focus groups or community conversations and family meetings. And some mapping with parents and students. Great, sounds like a lot of engagement with families and students to gather information on needs. All right, so feel free to keep kind of putting some information into the chat about how you're engaging and also questions that you have as well. And we will kind of keep moving here. So I think it's back to Carrie on using the needs assessment survey.
Thank you, Trudy, and thanks everyone for your feedback in the chat. And I think a couple things I heard were around focus groups and also student surveys and really working directly with students to understand what their experience is like. And I think we're going to touch on this in the next section, hopefully, but if there are other questions, please keep them coming. So as I mentioned earlier, the initial work was really on developing those teacher and administrator surveys. And through that process, we really learned quite a bit. And then we sort of expanded the work to reflect what we were learning. So as I said, started with teacher and administrators in the fall of 2018, and working with our advisory committee, which was made up of Native American educators from across the state, really started to unpack some of those results. And one of the things that we learned was, well, I'll say too, using those results to inform the action plan, but one of the exciting things we learned is that we were missing kind of a key voice, and it was that student voice, and so important. So North Dakota decided, let's move forward with a student survey and see if we can kind of bring more people to the table, more perspectives to the table. And again, I just wanted to give you a sense of what that process looked like for developing the student survey. And it was really kind of engaging different stakeholders along the way to really understand what they thought it was important to learn from students. So DPI identified the need. We did some sort of brief literature reviews around what other people were asking students and some key studies around what Native students' experiences were. And then we went back to our advisory committee and asked for their input. And they really started to unpack some different areas that they wanted to delve into a little bit more deeply, like student attendance and how schools were supporting cultural identity. And then the exciting part was that we worked with focus groups at 5 different schools, and they were elementary, middle, high school, And we did some in some more urban locations and then in some more rural tribal locations. And we talked to students and we sat with them and asked them what they wanted to see or what they wanted adults to know about their experience. And from there, we drafted a survey. And these were kind of the 5 big areas that students talked about. They were around attendance and bullying, and how schools support their students' cultural identity, school climate, and then what schools' expectations were of students and how they were supporting them for life after high school. And I just have to say, talking to the students was such an amazing experience. They were so honored to be invited into schools to talk to students. And they were so insightful and articulate and very candid, and just offered powerful statements about what they wanted adults to know. And some of the things they told us were things that I think all kids want. They want to feel safe in school and they want to be connected. And they valued those personal connections with teachers and administrators. And they also provided insight into how they wanted Native Americans to be viewed and included in their textbooks and their lessons, and the lengths that many of their teachers went to make adjustments to their curriculum to really reflect current events and Native history and perspectives. And one of the students said, textbooks talk about and glorify manifest destiny, but they don't talk about the darker side of it, and that being displaced or massacred Native Americans. And it really, I don't know, I every time I read that quote, I get goosebumps. It's just that candid conversation was just really helpful in terms of the survey. And we piloted that last fall, and just starting to unpack those results and help North Dakota disseminate those. And then just, I wanted to touch quickly on South Dakota and kind of how they had seen what was happening in North Dakota in the needs assessment survey, and similarly wanted to build up a process, a needs assessment process. And I think the interesting thing is that they took that process, but they put their own mark on it. And their own mark was that they wanted different content. So they wanted really to focus on how schools were implementing the Oceti Sakowin essential understandings and how aware teachers were, how they were using them, how they implemented them. And again, the survey in South Dakota was administered in the fall, and it was administered for teachers across the state, teachers and administrators across the state, and really to help the state think about targeted professional development. And so that work kind of continues on in South Dakota. But one of the key factors, and I mentioned earlier about disseminating results and how important that was for South Dakota. So the research team created sort of a nice visual to really highlight some of the findings, so that the state could disseminate this and get the word out about the survey at a really high level. And in a way that's really, I think, pretty easy to understand. It's not a 20-page report or something really time-consuming to read and understand. So that work is ongoing for South Dakota and how they'll use those results going forward. And Tracy, are there any questions about that have come up in the chat?
Yeah, we've got a few questions trickling in here. So one participant has a question: are there ways to assess the needs of American Indian students that are related to academic progress, but may be more about risk factors, stressors, or insecurities, food, home, etc., that might be affecting academic progress?
Yeah, I think that is such a good question and so important. And I think it came up a little bit in some of our discussions with our advisory committee about including some of that content. And I think what our advisory committee was really telling us is that they wanted this needs assessment to really focus on what schools could do and change and what they could be kind of responsible for. And so I think, well, we talked about those and those were really important. And I think definitely something that could be included on a needs assessment survey. Our advisory committee wanted to kind of hold back on some of those types of questions. But I think it's, yeah, so important. And I think definitely doable.
Yeah, we have some other comments too. One person writes, we are interested in the student and parent perceptions of our school's success in embracing cultural values and integrating an Indigenous perspective into the curriculum and instruction. I'm wondering, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to follow that up to say, knowing that you know, the various topics that are covered in this needs assessment and that it's publicly available, having been developed under that with REL funding, is this something that only states could use? Could this be something that is used at the local level?
Oh, I think that's such a great question. And I would encourage everyone, if you're thinking about doing a survey, to just take a peek. And there's a section of the tool where we kind of unpacked how you could use some of the questions at the local level or your school level, district level, how you might adjust some of those questions. And I would be so thrilled to see people use those questions, to run with them, to make them their own. And if it's helpful to use that process to start, you know, expanding it and adjusting to their own local context. If it's, as the earlier question around student stressors, maybe that's that's the focus of your survey. I think there's still maybe ways to use the tool that could support that.
We do have another question from a participant asking how to create questions that are data-driven and culturally appropriate. And I know you've been sharing a little bit about the process used here to ensure that idea of cultural validity.
Yeah, such a good question. When I think about data-driven, I guess I'm wondering if it's, and I'll just give an example. So we, worked with teachers and we did some interviews around some of the questions to make sure that they were culturally appropriate and they were really reflecting some of the concerns that teachers were having in the classroom and things like that. And then on the back end, there were a lot of technical and data analytics that kind of went into looking at those survey items so that we were pretty confident that they were kind of functioning in a quantitative way that we wanted them to as well. And I don't know if that gets to the question around data-driven. But if not, yeah, just keep asking the question.
Yeah, that's so far, those are the questions that I see. I will keep an eye on the chat box though.
Thank you all. And I am gonna turn it over to Stephen and he'll talk about sharing and interpreting survey data.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned earlier on, the needs assessment survey is really just the beginning, kind of an entry point into this whole process. So now I want to look at what the tool provides in regards to actually using the data. And so within the tool itself, there's quite a bit of guidance, some examples and some strategies for analyzing your data and looking at response rates, for example. We created some examples in Excel so that when you have your data after administering your needs assessment, there's a step-by-step approach to analyzing it, creating visuals. And we find that's important because, you know, that it takes there's a lot of resources that we scanned and reviewed, and a lot of experience over the years that we kind of put into a more concise step-by-step approach that is more accessible for many. And so once you have those results included in the needs assessment toolkit as well, you have opportunities and guidance for co-interpreting results. And so that was done quite a bit with North Dakota, and of course, also in South Dakota, as Carrie mentioned earlier, just really working with leadership in the departments of education in those states, and then also with advisory committees and stakeholders to really sit down, look at the data, and have a nice opportunity to sit with the community so they can also interpret those results. So it's not us interpreting the results for them, but rather they're also getting their hands in it as well and making sense of it. And many times, as Trudy and Carrie can both point out, oftentimes we see something in the data that we think is one way, but then the community member or a stakeholder comes in and has a different perspective that really shines light on it and really makes sense out of it. And so important, as mentioned earlier, is this is like an entry point, right? This is just the beginning of the process. And so once you're able to conduct those analyses using the tool, interpret those results with stakeholders, then you can start producing graphics and share out those results. And then there comes the next step. So we can go to the next slide, Carrie, please. And the next step is really the so what. So what are you going to do about what you found in the data, what you saw with stakeholders when you did the co-interpretation? And that's the development of what is called an action plan. And so data from that teacher and administrator surveys, and then now that we're working on the student survey in North Dakota, those data results will also go into play when it comes to the next rendition of the action plan. Those data are used to identify areas in which schools need support. And an example of that, in which you do have access to, is the North Dakota Native American Needs Action Plan. And so the action plan is organized. You can see the example here from 2021, 2022. It is organized by areas of need. And I should point out that this is from the last iteration of the action plan. We're currently working on a new version of it because these documents are not intended to be just set in stone. They really should be revised every year based on what the needs assessment data says for that particular year. And so the action plan is organized by those needs identified in the needs assessment survey. And you can see here there were 4 needs for the 2021-2022 school year that rose to the surface, and also that our partners in North Dakota identified as being something that they felt was really important to zoom in on. So we have providing culturally responsive curriculum and instruction, promoting social emotional learning, using equitable instructional practices, and engaging with the Native American community. Each need has evidence-based strategies and resources related to each strategy. And so the team at REL Central took those topic areas and conducted literature reviews to find resources that were in the form of a report, for example. You can see on the bottom of the screen here, reports, lesson plans, curriculum, professional development opportunities, toolkits, webinars, I mean, you name it, any type of resource that could be identified and tagged to one of these 4 needs was included in that action plan. And so we can go on to the next slide. And so you all have access to this action plan, so please take a look at it after the session, and you'll see that within each need, there are several strategies that are associated with each. In the strategy and guidance for planning, providing, evaluating for professional development, that helps teachers use the new strategies. And so we really try to made sure that these were concise. I mean, anybody can really go out and get a whole stack of resources and say, and throw them at an educator and say, here, dig through these to find some strategies. But the goal of the action plan is to really to make sure that it's accessible and it's something that teachers can really get their hands on, and also administrators within those schools who are really working hard to support those teachers. Moving on to the next slide, Carrie. And so here's a screenshot of what that action plan looks like in detail. So I mentioned in the 2021-2022 action plan for North Dakota, there were those 4 needs. One of the needs was improving culturally responsive curriculum and instruction. And so in the action plan, when you go to those strategies, there are several of them. And then within each strategy, you have a matrix like you see here. On the left-hand side, you have the resource title. So you can see we have the essential understandings from North Dakota and also from South Dakota. And I don't know if folks are familiar with the essential understandings, but they are essentially, an instructional, curriculum is not a good word for it, but basically the essential understandings are based off of the tribes within those geographic areas. And so North Dakota tribes came together and generated the essential understandings that they felt were important to share their culture, their language, traditions, and respond and contribute to the society locally and globally, including their Native identity. You also have in the action plan the user. So what that particular resource is best suited for. So you can see here with the North Dakota, excuse me, Native American essential understandings, you have teacher and administrators. Both those individuals would benefit from this resource. You have the type of resource that it is, a report, webinar, professional development, and so on. And then lastly, probably most importantly, is the location of where you can access these resources. And most of the resources in the action plan are usually free. There may be a few that have a small fee assigned to them, but we really looked at finding resources that were, one, focusing on Native students. And so there's a lot of research out there, but it may not be pertinent to the community in North Dakota, for example. We also tried to find resources that were publicly available as well. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please. And so this is just one example of what one of those resources was. We originally intended to play it today, but I don't think we're going to have quite enough time, Tracy. So we can share this link in the chat, and this link will bring you to the Center for Standards and Assessment and Accountability at WestEd. And it's a series of several videos that were put together to support teachers and administrators, those who support teachers, with culturally responsive instruction for Native American students. And the next slide, please. And as we mentioned earlier, I mean, it's a long process. It's quite a process to generate a needs assessment, to administer that needs assessment, to analyze the data, to co-interpret with your stakeholders to make sense of what's there, to disseminate that information, develop an action plan for next steps. But along the way with North Dakota, for example, we really went to pretty great lengths to make sure that we were providing resources that people could access and they could use. And so, for example, we helped North Dakota develop multiple training sessions. And those training sessions were provided at the North Dakota Indian Education Summit, online sessions. And that summit takes place every summer. And those training sessions really were a way for, not only do you have the needs assessment toolkit, but you also have these training videos that support the use of the needs assessment, analyzing data, co-interpreting data, developing an action plan. So it's not just there in text, but it's also there in audio and visual form as well. And we continue to work with our partners in North Dakota to create additional videos and ongoing support to make sure that the toolkit, the needs assessment toolkit, and the action plan are really useful. It looks like we might have some time to show some of the video. So if you'd like to show some of the video, Carrie, if you could just backtrack a bit. Tracy mentioned we have a little bit of time.
I think is it embedded right there in your slide? You can play it there, or if you prefer, I can bring it up. I'll just take a second.
Yeah, that would be great if you could bring it up, Tracy. Sorry.
Not a problem. I was noting in the chat box that I've also used this resource in other projects outside this OIE technical assistance. Did you prefer the first video or a different one?
I don't know if we have a preference, Carrie. I mean, I think.
Yeah, the first one's great. And I'll echo, Tracy, what you were saying too. Just, I love this resource because it's, well, namely, it's no cost, publicly available, and they're just nice 10-minute snippets of videos that are a nice way to access some of the material in a really user-friendly way. And we all know how busy teachers are and administrators, and this just was a really nice, I thought, way to access some ideas around culturally responsive instruction. So do I need to stop share, Tracy?
Yep, just stop your share and then I'll jump right in and bring that up for us. Share. All right, I'll make it big for everyone. There we go.
Responsive instruction for Native American students. The purpose of this module is to support teachers' efforts to provide culturally responsive instruction for Native American students. The module includes the following sections: the what and why of culturally responsive instruction, understanding culture and Native American diversity, foundations for culturally responsive practice, where to start, initial guidelines, going further, more guidelines, pedagogical implications by subject area, and developing a culturally responsive practice. This video addresses the first section, the what and why of culturally responsive instruction. To begin, we will start with describing what culturally responsive instruction is. Culturally responsive instruction assumes that a firm grounding in the heritage, language, and culture indigenous to a particular tribe is a fundamental prerequisite for the development of culturally healthy students and communities associated with that place. Different scholars have weighed in over the years on this question. This professional learning series ascribes to the following principles. Culturally responsive instruction is schooling that makes sense to students who are not members of or assimilated into the dominant social group. It recognizes, respects, and uses students' identities and backgrounds as meaningful sources for creating educational experiences and environments. It also includes high expectations for all students. Culturally responsive instruction is designed and practiced in ways that resonate with the cultures that students bring with them from home. It builds a bridge between the cultures of home and school. To engage in culturally responsive instruction, teachers need to learn about diverse students, learn about their needs, take actions to address these needs, and adapt their approaches as students' needs change over time. We recognize that a number of different terms have been used to describe the integration of culture and education, such as culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive pedagogy, and culturally responsive education. We've chosen to use the term culturally responsive instruction for this professional learning series because of the scope it implies. These materials address what teachers and students do in the classroom. The program does not encompass a school-wide effort, though we believe that is also very important. We offer the materials here as a starting place in a longer, worthwhile journey. Why is it important to provide culturally responsive instruction for Native students? The literature highlights the following points. First, it is an issue of equity. a central tenet of our democracy. Secondly, culturally responsive instruction is needed because current schooling is not meeting Native students' educational needs. Thirdly, the literature shows that culturally responsive instruction does benefit Native students' educational success. Culturally responsive instruction is also important in supporting tribal goals for their youth. And finally, the federal Every Child Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires education that supports and is responsive to Native American students' language and culture. In thinking about equity and its meaning, the Arizona Department of Education guidance on culturally inclusive practices offers an important insight. It states that equity does not equal equality. Rather, an equitable educational system provides resources and supports at the level needed by each individual student and recognizes that all students do not need the same supports. What do we mean when we say that current schooling is not meeting and indeed is failing to meet the educational needs of Native students? The numbers show a clear story. For example, our National Assessment of Educational Progress shows that Native student scores lag behind other students, and the opportunity gap is growing. Native students' high school dropout rates also greatly surpass those of other students. The obvious result is that Native students frequently are not adequately prepared for college or career success, or to take on the roles needed of them in their communities. But the research shows a way forward to close these gaps. Numerous case studies demonstrate the value of culturally responsive instruction for Native students.
I know that was just a snippet, and hopefully whet some appetite for a little bit more. But I know I want to be mindful of time as well, so make sure that you all have can make sure you address any questions that might be coming up. But definitely we have the link there, and there's I think 5 or more videos in that series that delve into different aspects of culturally responsive teaching. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, great. And I think we're moving on to the next slide with some lessons learned. And so insights and lessons learned. Throughout this whole process, we're always learning from our partners, and some key takeaways are: 1, ongoing communication in different formats is key to dissemination and use. And so previously you saw that Carrie shared some infographics that we developed, and so that was one format for disseminating results. We also had a number of meetings with stakeholders, including the advisory committees, PowerPoint presentations, co-interpretation sessions, infographics. And so it's important to have the information shared in a variety of formats, because it's not always going to be someone at a state education department who maybe has some experience or with research and looking at data. There are also going to be teachers who are interested in this data, administrators, community members, tribal members. And so it's important that the information is communicated in a number of different ways. Some folks might like reading a 20-page report. Quite a few more probably don't want to be reading that 20-page report. Another key lesson is, highlight a range of resources and strategies to support schools. So as we look back earlier in the action plan, you saw there were several strategies for each need. And it's important that those resources that those strategies are based off of really have a range. And what we mean by that is, there are some initiatives and some interventions that require a heavy lift by schools and districts and require a lot of capacity to implement those types of interventions. And some schools and districts just don't have that. But if we provide them with resources that some of them are a little more easy to implement, then we can make sure that all schools and districts aren't really being held back from the capacity in the school. And then you may have some school and districts that are able to come across some grant money, and they can implement some of those more intense interventions and strategies. And then lastly, listening to how the resources are being used and what adjustments need to be made. And so this process is cyclical. And so we're always looking back at the last year's survey to look at revisions that need to be made. Perhaps some of the items just weren't quite right for the particular age group of students, for example. We look back at the action plan and revise that based off the most current needs assessment data. And so, as was mentioned earlier, from the student assessment that was given in North Dakota, we have some new topic areas this year that will go into revising the action plan and updating it for the schools and districts across North Dakota. And then also listening to some of the educators and some of the administrators who are using the strategies in the action plan to make sure those resources are actually practical, they're useful, they're appropriate. And so this process is always cyclical in nature, always looking back, revising, reflecting, and really leveraging the expertise of our partners in the region. And then Carrie and Trudy, you may have some additional insights and lessons learned too, that you might want to share before I turn it back over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. And I guess I just wanted to circle back to one of the biggest things that I learned just from my own research perspective was that it was so important for me to show up in different ways and go to conferences in North Dakota and just have those informal conversations with people. And they were educators in the state were so willing to share their perspectives on the survey and just stop me in the hallway during a conference and say, oh, we really need this additional survey question on attendance. And they would give that to me. And if I came back to the conference the next year and that wasn't on the survey, I knew that they would follow up with me. And that was important, that I just needed to make sure that everybody felt valued and that they were valued, and all of the input was really considered and included in the survey. And so that was one of my own personal lessons learned. I don't know, Trudy, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Carrie. I just was going to kind of probably echo a little bit of what Stephen and Carrie said, and thinking about some of the next steps in the States is really moving to also how do we really share the findings even more broadly and widely. So thinking about creating some more of those graphics to highlight the key findings and make it more accessible to everyone to be able to see what we have learned from doing the needs assessments. And then also thinking about other ways to potentially enable districts or local education agencies, tribal education to be able to use the needs assessment more locally as well. So kind of moving from the statewide effort to really focusing on that local support.
So important. And there were two questions that have popped up in the chat for us. And one of them is about the student survey and if that's available, I think is the question. And right now, so in 2021, we did a pilot. And so we're just in kind of the final stages of adjusting some of the wording on some of the questions. They just needed a little bit of refinement. And so we're working with North Dakota to get that finalized. And once that is finalized, I think the intention for North Dakota is to put that on their website, on the Department of Public Instruction website, so that folks can access that. And they really want to encourage schools within the state, and I'm sure happy for other people to use that student survey in their own local contexts. But I guess my question to Tracy is, it's not yet available, but I don't know if there's a way to communicate to folks on this call when it would be available, or if it's just to circle back to the DPI website in a couple months.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to know where we can follow up and look for that. Our grantees know that we have regular opportunities to interact through talking circles and other webinar events. So we can, you know, if they ask us about that, we can definitely lift it back up, or they can reach out to us and you know, if there's any questions about it, hey, have you seen it yet? Is it up? But I know we also have your contact information available at the end of the slide deck as well. So a few different ways to follow up there.
Perfect.
I also just put the
Oh, you just went on mute. We heard.
Sorry, I put the needs assessment link for the landing page for North Dakota Department of Public Instruction needs assessment. So that's where it will be when it's available. So in case anyone wants to kind of keep checking that site.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy. And one other question we had was how we're addressing and engaging with student community assessment and assessment fatigue. And thank you so much for that question. Such an important thing right now, especially with everything that's going on. And I know states are doing their own opportunity to learn surveys. And then this is, you know, they're doing the regular student assessment surveys. And then to add this one additional survey on is, it's a lot. I think that, and I don't know if this addresses the question, but it really is circling back and letting people know that if they take the survey, and we're trying to keep it as short as possible, if they take the survey, we're definitely reading all of those responses, we're honoring those voices, and we're committed to disseminating those results. And I think that helps when people know that those really will influence the action plan, or they will really be communicated to the state, and folks are really listening to those voices. But it's definitely a challenge. I don't know, Trudy or Stephen, do you have anything else on that, on assessment fatigue?
I don't think so. I did put in the chat just for reference that North Dakota does the needs assessment state level once a year. So that's some information about how often they're using it across the State Department. And similarly in South Dakota, it's a yearly. So just some information about the timing and how often they're trying to collect information at the State Department. But I can imagine also it might be nice to think about coordinating and collaborating in terms of efforts at the state level and local level. I know oftentimes that can be a challenge as well in terms of too many asks of teachers, parents, and students, is making sure to coordinate those efforts.
And that's all I was going to add as well. It's just, that's why it's so important to work with, you know, stakeholders and partners, and making sure that, you know, we don't have a needs assessment survey going out on Wednesday, and then there's another survey going out on Friday. And so that coordination and working and collaborating with the state agencies is really important. All right, I think we're turning it back over to you, Carrie, for a recap and final thoughts.
Yeah, and I think this is just an opportunity for, well, one, for me to express my gratitude for everyone for logging into the call. I know everyone is really, really busy, and really appreciate your engagement and your questions. And if there are additional questions, I think we have a couple minutes left, but if not, that's fine too. And I just wanted to get to this last slide because this is our contact information, and feel free to take a screenshot of this or take a photo. And as questions come up, or if it's a month from now or a year from now, and you're thinking about doing a survey and you have questions about the tool or absolutely anything at all, the three of us are available and just willing to talk more. So thank you all so much. And Tracy, are there any closing words?
Sorry, I was chatting on mute there for a second. I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for sharing this work with us and the tools. You know, it's serving American Indian communities and youth. I know our grantees are always on the lookout for tools and resources that are specific to that context. And so that's why we were so grateful to be able to bring this here today. And yeah, if folks, if you have any questions, follow up, you can follow up with email with that contact information. And we also have that conversations tab. If you're looking at the Pathable platform and you see those tabs across the top, welcome, schedule, etc. Under conversations, there's a discussion board, and you can follow up there with any conversations that maybe you weren't able to dive into as deeply as you would have liked to hear at this session. So thank you to our presenters, and thank you to our participants.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.